Despite the will, my Aunt Karen thinks my parents' property belongs to her. This happened almost 5 years ago, and I just got notice yesterday that my entitled Aunt Karen has just died, and I got a call from her husband asking me to attend the funeral next weekend, and I declined. As did my older brother, Mark, for purposes of this story. Karen was my mother's older sister, and she constantly interfered in my mother and her children's lives. She never liked my father, and always tried to tell my mother that she made a mistake by marrying him. She didn't like the name my parents picked out for my older brother, and my great-grandmother died the day before I was born. And when Karen found out they were going to name me after her, Karen freaked out and said she wanted to name her potential future kid that so my mother couldn't use it. Then she tried to talk her out of it by saying it's too old-fashioned and kids would make fun of me, which they did, but for other reasons see my username for a clue. She criticized both my brothers and my choice of friends and even complained when I started playing softball, because proper ladies didn't play sports, and if her daughter ever tried playing a sport, she would have her removed from the team. Spoiler. She never had children. The day after my 16th birthday, my parents drove on a business trip down to California. I live in Idaho. My dad said that when they got back, he would drive me to the DMV to get my license. He never did, because on the drive to California, they hit a patch of ice, spun out, crashed, and died. I was a wreck for some time after that. I didn't even want to attend my high school graduation later, because my parents wouldn't be there. Their will split everything evenly between my brother and I. At the funeral, my parents, who owned their own business, production manager Tim, was talking to my brother, and my brother told him that in a couple weeks he would step in and take over, and he was counting on Tim to run things smoothly until then and help him in taking it over and learning the ropes. I had no interest in the business, other than it was a guaranteed summer job when I was growing up, so I stayed out of it and just collected profit checks until I sold my half to Mark, and he continues to run the business to this day. Mark told Tim that he should assure the employees there that their jobs were safe, and that no major changes would be made. Then one day, Aunt Karen showed up and began putting her stuff in my parents' office, and when Tim confronted her about this, she said his services were no longer needed and he was fired. Tim called Mark up, and Mark went down with the family attorney, some police, and the necessary paperwork, and had her removed, while she said the place was now hers because it was her sister's, so she was now the owner. As long as I have known her, she has never had a steady job, and has had 3 husbands. Not counting the man who called me, never met him, and milked each one for as much as she could get until she divorced him. The next day, I was leaving for school. I walked, it was fairly close, about 10 minutes, and saw her car and a moving van parked outside. She said she was moving into her house, and then said in a sickly sweet voice that for a reasonable rent, she would continue to allow me to stay there until I graduated high school. I went in and called my brother, and he again showed up with the family attorney, police, and all the paperwork, and had her removed from the property. I was at school, so I didn't get to see what happened, but that night Mark gave me a business card for a policeman, who I assume helped deal with all this, and told me that if I ever saw Aunt Karen on or near the property to call that number and report her immediately. Don't even try to confront her or give her a warning. Just call. I do know that the movers charged her to move her stuff into the van, drive across town, get turned away, and drive back across town and move her stuff back into her apartment, which she hadn't given notice yet. I got scared to the point that I didn't like letting our dog into the backyard when I was at school. I used to put her out in the yard to let her play in the fenced backyard while I was in school. For a while, I just put her in the locked and closed garage and then cleaned up her messes when I got home in the afternoon. Eventually, Karen moved to Colorado, where I assume she met and married the man who called me and said that she had died and he couldn't find anyone from her family to attend the funeral. I chose not to tell him about her. Politely said, "Sorry for your loss, but I can't make it." From discussions with Mark, he basically told him the same thing. Outside of myself, Mark, and Mark's infant daughter, I don't think she has any living relatives. I still own the house. Mark gave me his half as part of the deal where I sold him my half of the business, but still sleep in my bedroom. I refuse to move into what was once my parents' bedroom, the master bedroom, go to the local university, go Broncos, and still miss my parents and think about them every day. And even though I am 21 in less than 2 weeks, own a large home, have a lot of money in the bank, I would trade it all to have my parents back, but I don't care about the how or why of Aunt Karen's death. Thank you for reading, and sorry for the length. Story 2. Why I stopped giving airplane rides. I am a pilot, and once owned a small two-place slow and low airplane, Quicksilver. I belonged to a loose-knit flying club that leased a farmer's grass strip private airport. Once a month in the summer, we held a cookout, and I would give rides in my Quicksilver to friends and family. 2 separate events resulted in me stopping this practice. Typically at a cookout, there were people waiting for me to show up and start giving rides. I did not mind and enjoyed sharing my airplane. One time, I had been giving rides for about 3 hours when I finally finished with the last passenger. As I went over to get some food and drink, the father of one of the kids who went up with me stopped me. He said, "I know it costs a lot to operate an airplane. I only had $10 to put in the donation bucket. I hope it is enough." Now every private pilot knows it is illegal to accept compensation for flying, in any form. My replay was, "I don't know who put out a donation bucket, but it was not for giving rides. It's illegal for me to accept any compensation, donations or not. I gladly pay for all the expenses, and that bucket has nothing to do with me or my airplane." Also note that when I finished, the donation bucket magically disappeared. There were also a bunch of pissed off people when the word got around and the bucket never appeared again. Yes, I knew who put it out, and we later had an come to Jesus discussion about it. Yeah, he just pocketed the money. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I was giving my pre-flight brief to a young girl who was eager to have her first airplane ride. After showing how the intercom worked, I told her that if she felt sick or got scared, let me know and I will get her back on the ground as quickly as possible. Her dad was standing by her when I said that, and he gave me the alpha male stare and said, "You scare her and I will sue you." We kind of had a staring contest, and I then apologized to the girl, saying I would no longer be able to give her a ride. I also put the airplane away, canceling the rest of the rides that day. After that, my airplane always had issues when we had a cookout. Story 3. Entitled client thinks that everything can be solved by talking to the supervisor. For a little more context, I work as a receptionist at a medical clinic, and it is not my job of choice. Even though I don't love my job, I take it seriously, as other people's health is not a joke, in addition to having the job policy of doing the best job possible at the moment, having to correct later what is much more work. I have seen many clients who are rude or disrespectful, including an elderly lady trying to beat my coworker using a cane, which became the unit's internal joke for the month. In another day's work, a client arrives with 3 pages of exams to take, big but not the biggest I've ever seen, and as always I added each exam to this system. Keep in mind that it is not the only step in the work. It is still necessary in some medical plans to make additional requests and add each individual code back to the health insurance system. As the client was on the phone, the first part was very quiet, but when she finished the call, she started complaining and insisted on being in a very loud tone for the whole place to hear, talking about how long I was taking and how much time she needed too much to be there. As professionally as possible, I said what I was doing, the most delayed part. I was attaching the order to a fixed agreement and waiting for the return. The client asked to speak to my supervisor, who was already coming to see what had happened. My supervisor knows this type of client very well, and he knows that it is not possible to do all the procedures by magic. With all the professional words he explained to the client. The client did not accept what my supervisor said and demanded that my supervisor substitute me for opening the record. My supervisor, being responsible for the area, had to resolve the situation. Now comes the part that the client does not know. All the forms have to be opened at the login of who is making the request, and I was no longer responsible. With a big smile, I erased everything I spent almost 2 hours doing, and bonus I had to cancel the request for medical insurance. Good luck having to wait another 2 hours for a completed medical record to be done again, in addition to the time after the exams are approved in the health insurance.